Okay, so let's start. First of all, the same as yesterday, I prepared a playground here in the calendar. You can download the files so that we can try to experiment while we explain. We can take a look at how it works with the code, okay? So if you have the laptop, please download these files, the one here, the playground I set up here, okay? Concerning the lab, I will be publishing today the list with the two groups, with the two sessions. Usually, based on my experience, we won't have any problem, and then you will have the chance to choose between the sessions. But at least for this first lab, let's try to distribute among these two sections, and then we will see how many people is coming, and we will see how big is the lab. And I think after this third lab, maybe you can choose the session you want to come. The same way here today you will see the text of the first lab, so I'll be publishing the text in case any of you want to start working or taking a look at the text, or if you want to prepare in advance the text for the lab, you are free to do so. So I will be publishing it today, and of course I will be writing on Telegram so that you know that the lab text is published, okay? Fine, so yesterday we were basically started talking about layouts, and up to now we have talked about grid layouts. We were saying that we were going to see grid layouts on Flexbox. Concerning the grid layouts, we basically said that they are two-dimensional. It's a grid, it's a display in which the components or the elements are displayed in a two-dimensional grid structure. It basically works as an Excel, if we want to think as that, as an Excel spreadsheet in which we have cells, we have columns, rows, and we can play with the combinations that we can have from there. We also saw how to define a container as a grid container. It is basically a property that it is the display. So if the parent container has the display property set as grid, then the elements within will behave as if they were in a grid. We took a look at how to define the width of each column and the number of columns, no? So we said that by using this syntax, we could specify that we will have 3 columns, each one of 100 pixels. And in here we will have 2 rows, each one 150 pixels. And we also said that the grid gap is the space between the cells, okay, the gap that we will leave between the cells. There was also the chance not to specify a specific value, but to indicate that each column will have like the same width. And the easiest way to do that dynamically is by using this unit, that is the fraction. So we were saying that each column will have the same fraction or the same amount of width. We also saw that there is like an alternative syntax to express the same that we had before, that is repeat. So it is not a function, but a different syntax just to express what we had before. So that we don't have to write 3 times the same value, like in here, but just to say, I want it to repeat 3 times, and then as the second value, the width that we want to assign to a column. We also see that it was possible to mix units, no? So at some point, set a fixed unit for the width, like 100 pixels, then a percentage, like 30 pixels, and then a fraction. It's kind of strange, it's difficult, it might become a mess because you don't have an exact idea of how much space it will occupy, but it's an option. Technically, it's possible. Okay. And do you remember what was this? What was this? This was concerning the chance or the possibility that we have that a cell occupies more than just one space, no? Than just one cell. So in this case, it is like to expand the area that a cell will occupy into a grid. To do so, we specify a starting row, an end row, a starting column, and an end column. So for instance, if we think of this diagram here, we might think that this one, for instance here, is a cell or is a container within the grid container that doesn't occupy just one cell, but we could set this to occupy from the from the third row up to the fifth row, and from the third column up to the fifth column. No, that's the idea. So that we can set this one to occupy more than just one cell. Is it clear, the idea? Okay. And an alternative syntax for this might be this one, that simplifies everything, but to use this one, we must understand what the values means. So, questions up to now? This is like a very quick review of what we said yesterday. Okay, so let's try to see how this looks in practice. So this is the file that I prepared you yesterday, that I prepared for today. Later we will see what does this font means. Okay, but don't forget, let's have in mind that we have like this new element that we haven't seen so far. So we will see what this font specifically means. But let's start with the example, and then we will go into that. So what do we have here? Exactly the same as we had in the slides, no? We have a container, the container has a class, and I decided each element within the container to have an ID, okay? Why do you think I decided to use an ID in this case? Because maybe I want to give each element within the container a specific property, or I want to set it in a given way into the grid container, okay? So that's why I decided to use an ID, and these containers are super simple. It just has like, they just have like a number, okay? So this is the HTML we will be dealing with to show you how the grid layout works. And then on the styles, we have the grid container. What does the grid container have? The most important part, the most important property, of course, is this one, because by using this property, we're saying that we want the elements within that container to distribute as a grid layout. So this one. What do you think, or how do you think this one will behave? Or how does this property is going to look? What are we saying? Yeah, that we are using one fraction. I mean, one fraction at the beginning, one fraction at the end, and the fraction in the middle is 4 times the first one and the last one. Yeah. And with the rows instead, we are saying that we will have 3 rows, each one of them 100 pixels height. Okay. Here, what do we mean by padding 1 rem? Is the spacing, yeah?
The items
Yeah, between the border and the contents of the grid layout. So we want to leave like a space there so that all of the items are not stick to the border. And then we have a border, a 2 pixel border with that specific color. Okay. What does this syntax means?
We're looking at the class, at the elements div that have the class library container.
Sure. So by using the selector in this way, you are trying to point out at all of the div elements within the element that has the class myGridContainer. So within the element that has been defined as myGridContainer, I want the divs to behave in this way. So why this works for us? Because here within the class myGridContainer, we have all of these div elements, okay? So we are pointing at them. Is it the same as if this were like this? No, because in that case, we are pointing to all of the divs in the whole HTML and not to the divs within the class myGridContainer, okay? Okay. Here we have like some properties concerning the visual appearance, the background color, the color of the text. I set a specific font size for the text within there, font weight, a padding, also to set like a space between the border and the text within the container. What do you think is this one for? Border radius? Is to make like the borders rounded. Basically, the text align center and the margin, that is the space between the border and the outer space, was set to .625 rem, okay? As you can see here, I'm always using the rem. That, as we saw yesterday, it is a measure that is relative to the font size of the whole document, of the HTML root, okay? So let's see how this looks. Okay, so this is the grid layout as it is right now. Okay, so this, in here we have the grid layout. Let me Is it fine like this? Can you still see the code? Okay. So in here you can see that there is one element that occupies more than the other ones, no? That is the number 3. That in this case, it is the one that has the ID item grid 3. So if we take a look at how this ID or what was the CSS that we are applying to that specific element, we can see that we are changing the background color, as we can see here, and then we are playing with the properties that we saw in the slides. No? Let's try to if those properties were not there, by default, you can see that the elements are going to be positioned there according to the grid that we defined. In our grid, the first column was one column, one fraction of the whole space. The last one was also one fraction, and the middle one was 4 fractions. So it meaning that this one is 4 times this one and 4 times this one. Is clear that idea? So within here we can have 4 times this one. Indeed, if we, let's say for instance 2, then you can see that here this one is 2 times the width of the first one and 2 times the width of the second one. What if instead of this here we write 2 fractions? Then we will have 1 unit, 2 units, 2 units. Okay, that's basically how it works. Okay, and the same as I've been telling you the last classes. Although this seems super simple and this seems super basic, it's a very powerful concept, because in this way we are already seeing how we can set the layout and how we can position the elements to something that looks more like a website, no? Because in websites it is not as we have done so far, that we have everything from up to bottom, but they usually use like the whole horizontal space. So this is the way that we can start to think of a website, in which we occupy all of the available horizontal space. So what if we want the third element to occupy all of this, to occupy the space of this that currently are occupying the first and the second element? How can we implement that? By using the properties that we had before here. So we can set a row start, that is the first one, and we can set a row end. In this case we might say it is the second one. Okay, so do you see that when I set the second one and as the ending row, it just occupies one row, because it starts in the first one and ends in the second one. Okay, and then I can set like a column start, so it will start in the first column and it will end in the third column. Okay, that is this one. This is the first one, second one, at the third one it will stop. If I set this one to the fourth, then it will occupy the whole row, because the row just have 3 columns. So if I set it to occupy until the fourth one, that it doesn't exist but it should be here, hypothetically it will occupy all of the column, all of the row, sorry. Okay, and let's say that this one, for instance, will occupy until the fourth. So, well, do you understand like the reasoning behind that reasoning? And as you can see, even here with a simple example, this is super powerful, no? Because this starts to look again like a website, and we can think by seeing at something like this as a layout like this, we can imagine, for instance, do you remember the Politecnico website? That here there was like an important news, like the main news, and here there were like some smaller news or some smaller items or some more specific contents. So basically by playing with these properties, we are almost able to replicate any layout. Okay. What else? Well, I don't know. in this case, if I delete the display property, it won't work. So always make sure that you have declared the the display property and you set the display property as grid. Okay. Well, I don't know what else to show here, but just to give you an example of what the margin is for, just to leave a space between the elements so that they don't stick. But if we want is to have all of them stick without space between, you can erase the margin. Same stuff with the padding here. So if you erase the padding, you can see that all of the content within the elements will be stick to the border and nothing else. Okay, is it clear how this works? Okay, just to make sure and to show you something else also within this grid container, let's suppose that we want to create the same but for the fourth element. Okay, and well, of course you notice this, but since I declare 3 columns and since I declare the 3 columns and I am placing the elements, for instance, this one to occupy more than a column, what the grid container usually does is like it places the elements in the available space that it has, no? So for instance, this one occupies more than the other ones, but it tries to arrange all of the elements in the available spaces it has. So for instance, in here, we are having more than the rows that we declared here, no? Because here we were supposed to originally have just 3 rows. And instead of that, we are having like 2, 3, 4 rows, okay? But the columns are the one that remains fixed. So at the beginning, I declared that I will have 3 columns and the grid container will respect that declaration, and it will try to arrange all of the elements from top to bottom and from left to right, okay? So in this case, if I set one element to occupy more than one cell, it will arrange all of the other elements to try to fix all of the available spaces from top to bottom and from left to right, even if it has to create more rows than the one I declared here, or than the ones that I was expecting here.
Since the only way to manually control the size is to define a position for the box, then if I want to control the size of 2 elements, I will have to specify by myself their position, their static position.
Yeah.
Is there a way to define a size and then let it auto position it and not specify the points I want it to be?
Define size? What do you mean by define size?
I want a 2 per 3 box.
Okay.
I want it to position and not to have to position it by myself in a static way.
You mean 2 by 3, meaning 2 would be like the number of columns?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, well, let's try to do that. So for instance, you say like this. And well, it is just that.
I mean,
Like this. Like 2 by.
no, not really. I want an element to have the space of 3 per 2 boxes, a bigger area.
Okay.
But then I want another element to have a bigger area, and right now the way to do this is to set the position. So
Yeah. yeah, like the coordinates of where the element begins. Yeah.
And is there a way to have a bigger area while not giving static coordinates?
Yeah, there is a way. There is a way that we will see that one. That is the flexbox. That is like another way of arranging the elements, but within a row. And we will see that we can mix this one with the flexbox. But yeah, there is a way. Okay, and of course we can apply this property to a different element, and we will be pointing at that specific element because we are using the ID. Okay, that's the basic idea. Once again, this diagram starts to look more alike the structure of a website. No? We might think this as the header, this as the main content. If we join these three, or if we make, for instance, this container wider, we might think this as the footer, for instance. This one might be an aside or article, something like that, or an aside and sections, and both. So the message is that this starts to look more alike the layout of a website. Okay, so although simple, this is a powerful element that we have there. Do we have any questions? Is it clear how the grid container works? Okay. Now we have the flexbox. So do you remember that the grid was a two-dimensional container or layout? The flexbox is a one-dimension layout method for arranging the elements, but always thinking in one dimension. Okay, so we will think in here just in a row or just in a column. Okay. In this way of setting the elements there, we have like different properties. We have the alignments that, as you can see here in the diagram, it has to do with where to place the element on the left, on the right. We have the direction that is kind of the same as the alignment, but on the vertical axis. We have the order if we want each element on which position we want to set each element, if first, second, or third. We have the size, that is something similar to what we saw before with the fractions. And how does this one work? Pretty similar to the grid. No? So in this case, we also will start basically from the same HTML. The only difference here is that in the class, we will say the display property not as grid, but as flex. Okay, and immediately after we set this property to flex, then all of the elements within, all of the items within the container will start behaving as flex items. Okay. Okay, so the first property that we can set here is how we want the elements to place within the container. So we have four choices. The first one is row, that is the default one, and it is to place the elements from left to right horizontally. Okay. Then we have row reverse, that is from right to left, but always horizontally. And then we have column, if we want the elements to place one below the other one. And column reverse, if we want to place them also vertically, but starting from the bottom, going up to top. Okay, so it's pretty simple. And here we have two concepts. One is the main axis, and the other one is the cross axis. It is not fixed. It depends on which value we set to this property. So if we set that the flex direction is row, then the cross axis will be the vertical one. But if we set the flex direction to column, then the cross axis will be the horizontal one. Okay. Just as you can see here, so the justify content property, when the flex direction is row, is the one that will tell us how to align the items horizontally. But if the flex direction is column, the same property, justify content, will tell us how to align the elements vertically. Okay, that's the only difference. And the same happens with align items. If the flex direction is row, then align items will tell us how to position the elements vertically. But if the flex direction is column, the align items will tell us how to set the elements horizontally. Okay, not super difficult. So we have justify content to align the items on the main axis. And then we have align items to set the elements on the cross axis. As you can see here in the snippet, we just have like the display. We set the display as flex, meaning that all of these elements will behave as flex items. Then we have, in this case, we decided the direction to be row, meaning that the elements will be placed from left to right horizontally. The justify content, both the justify content and the align items will be set to center, meaning that it will center the elements horizontally, but it will also center the elements vertically. Okay. Which options do we have with the justify content? We have these options. We can set the elements at the start so that all of them align to the left. We can align in the center and at the end. This is basically how we might think as Word or the text processing applications, in which we can set the alignment of the text. But we also have more interesting choices. That is, for instance, this one that is spaced around. No? Can you think of an example of a website that uses this space around? It's difficult that way, but let's go back to our favorite website.
For example,
Yeah.
if you want to buy the raw one, the basic one, or the student one, there is a frequency that have the space between them and
Sure. Like with cards there. Yeah, sure. In that case, if you want to display like the elements but with some space, but at the same time all of them align in the middle, it is for sure like that one, a space around. Well, I don't know if this one is made in that way, but we might think that this one, that this space here, could be like a flexbox, no? And in the flexbox, we are placing the elements. The direction would be row, because we are placing them horizontally. And then we are placing them, I don't know if it's the case, but from left to right, okay? This one, for instance, this space here, we could be thinking that this is also a flexbox with the elements with the direction that in this case is not a row anymore but column, because it is placing the elements from top top to bottom. And in this case, we might say that the alignment is to the left, no? So it's the flex start, the one that we saw before. This, for instance, this space here, it's pretty similar to what we achieved with the grid container, no? Because with the grid container, we had like this big space occupying more than one cell, and we had the other ones that were set to the second column. No? So we might say that we are already able, by playing with the HTML and the CSS, to replicate a layout like this one. What else? This one we could think also of as a flexbox, okay? This one could be a grid, of course. Yeah, this is like the classical grid, no? With 3 rows and 3 columns. Each one of them, if we try to think of this, each one of them is one fraction, no? Because all, the 3 of them have the same width, so one fraction would do the trick. And well, and maybe this one, when you look at this footer, we could think of this footer as a flex container, no? And here we might say that we have like the space around, because all of them, they are not stick to the border, but they are here, and all of them keep like the space between, like these 3, because at the end, this is like a flex container with 4 columns or with 4 elements. And we have the first one here, the second one here, the third one here, and the fourth one here. So, well, at some point we can think of this one as the same. So by knowing this, we can already start building like more sophisticated layouts. What's the difference between a space around and a space between? In the space around, in the space between, it sticks the first and the last element to the borders, and then it plays or uses the very low space with in between. And with the space around, it simply like centers and distributes the space that it has available horizontally. Okay. Then we have this wrapping property that is also super useful, because what it means is that it makes the items to automatically wrap or to comply with the available width. So that if we exceed the space that we have available, then the items automatically go down and create a second row. And it is done by this property that is called flex wrap. And by setting this property, from having something like this in which the elements can exceed the container, the elements just comply with the container. Pay attention, because in this case, it is not that the flex has become a 2-dimension container, but it is that since it didn't have more space at the end, it created a new, it wrapped the elements and they continue on the row below, okay? But it's still 1-dimension container. So when we think of a grid container, it's a 2-dimension container. When we think of a flex container, it's a 1-dimensional container, okay? Up to now, do we have any questions? In here, how do we think these elements are behaving? Or what can you expect from something like this? without still knowing what it means. Yeah?
I guess it's something similar to the grid that we saw earlier.
Yeah. What do you mean? Yeah, it's that.
You can specify how much of the flexbox an item will take.
Sure, it's basically that. What's the difference with the grid? That in the grid we declare that for the container, no? So for the container we said how, what was the width of the columns. Instead here we are doing for each item, no? So we are setting that property individually for each item. Because as you can see there, we are applying that to the class that points at each element within the container. To item 1, item 2, and item 3. Okay? So that's the difference here. We are setting that property of the width of the element, not to the container, not here, not here, but we are setting that property to each element, meaning here. So, for instance, this one, the one in the snippet, to which one corresponds here? To the third one, no? Because in this case, the first one occupies 1, the second one occupies 1, and the second one is like 2 fractions of the other ones. Basically, the equivalence here. Okay, and if we don't set this property, all of them will occupy the same space. If we set the property but all of them to 1, they will occupy all of the available space, giving each element the same width. And if we specify this with different values, then depending on the values that we set for the element, it will occupy all of the available space, but giving more space to one element than to the others, depending to the definition that we make here, okay? Is it clear? Nice. What if we want something like this? If we want the one here to be like dynamic based on the available space, we can set these properties in this manner. So the first one and the last one, as you can see here, have the value initial. So it is like the default value. And we can say that the one in the middle will occupy as much available space as it can, considering that the first ones remain fixed with the default value. Okay. When do you think this is useful? Well, in the websites, it's basically like that. You have the main content, and within the main content, you can set all of the important elements, and in the aside elements, you can set like more small content or more small elements within there. A super important question: can we mix the two layouts, the grid layout with the flex layout? Could we use them? I mean, I'm rephrasing the question. I mean, here, of course, I have this container that is display flex, and then, of course, I can't create a new rule and set it to display grid, because it wouldn't make sense. But what I mean is, within, for instance, a grid container item, can I set that item of the grid container to behave as a flexbox? Yes. So this is why this becomes powerful, no? because maybe we can think of the general structure of the website as a grid, but then within the grid, for instance, the navigation bar, we can think of the navigation bar as a flex, no? So the links in there within the navigation bar or within the header behave like a one-dimension container, such as flex, but the whole structure of the website behaves as a grid container. That is basically how it works, okay? So yes, the answer is yes, you can mix both of them, and let's say that our job or our skills should be to identify how we want to design the website and how we better use these available layouts to replicate what we have in mind or what we draw in a paper, okay? So, okay, and then there is this super useful property also, that is the grouping, so that we can group items. With no grouping, as you can see here, all of them behaves individually. But in this case, if we group them, or better than this, how do we group the items? Here, how do you see that we are grouping the items? Why?
Yeah, by putting them inside the same section, the same div.
Yeah, by creating like a subgroup, no? So instead of div 1, div 2, div 3, I created this one between them. So for the flex container, now it has just 2 elements. No, it has this one and this one, okay? And the other ones are within the second container. So it would behave in this way.
So therefore the two elements in the second container are not flexbox.
No, they are not flexbox. They are just regular elements there.
Then what's the point of giving them a class anyway?
To these ones?
Yeah.
Because yeah, in this snippet maybe it doesn't make any sense, but I was thinking that maybe here we would like this one to behave also as a flexbox, no? So we could set a class for this one, for this div, so that these elements within the div behave as a flexbox, and then we can apply the properties we've seen before, no? Yeah, in that case, it would make more sense to deal with them in that way. And for instance, something like this somehow is similar to a header, no? That it has like the logo here on the left, and on the right it might have like the navigation links, like the Politecnico's website, that it has like the Politecnico's logo at the left, and then on the right it has well, some more elements. And this is like a sheet with the available properties that you can use with Flex, okay? Why is this Flex important? Once again, it is not because we have to learn all of the properties or because we have to memorize all of the rules that we can use in the CSS, but it is because Bootstrap, that is the framework that we will use for the CSS, it's based upon this context, upon this concept. So if we don't know how the Flex work, then it will be super hard to customize what by default Bootstrap does, okay? Or to understand why Bootstrap behaves in some way or sets the layout in some specific way. So this is why we are getting like a conceptual overview of how Flex works. Fine? Okay, so here we have the flexbox. Okay, so let's think of this as the default one, no? This is the super easy one in which we have like a container that has this class my FB container, that stands for my flexbox container. It's a regular container that it has the border. From here we can see that it has like the solid border with this color, that is this one that we are seeing here. It has, okay, the padding, the height, and everything else. Then the first important thing is the display property is set to flex. So in this case, it's not grid anymore, but flex, meaning that all of the elements within that container will behave as flex items, okay? Then the first thing that I decided here was to set the direction property as a row. What happened if instead of row, I write row reverse? It changes the order in which the elements are placed within the container, nothing else. Which other option do I have here? Column, in which by setting the property in this way, the elements are placed vertically aligned, one below the other one. And let's try to imagine what would happen with the column reverse. The same, just that up to, okay? So super easy, nothing very difficult. Then the justify content property. So in this case, with justify content, we have flex start, center, flex end, space around, and a space between. Let's check them. Okay. What happens here when I set it to flex start? Where did it align the elements with the justify content property? At the bottom. Why? Because the row direction is column, but not just column, but column reverse. So it sticks them to the bottom. Okay. If these were just column, it would stick them to the top. Okay. If instead of column, because in this case the main axis is the vertical axis, no? So the justify content is the one that places the elements regarding the main axis, okay? But instead of this, if I set the direction not to column but to row, then the main axis would be the horizontal one. And the justify content property is the one that sets me where do I want to place the elements within the horizontal axis. Meaning that in this case, flex start is not anymore for sticking the items to the top, but to try to stick or to move them to the left. Okay? It's nothing very difficult. If instead of start I set end, it will move them to the right. What was? Of course, center. space around, and space between. Okay, super easy. Nothing very fancy. And the same happens with align items, no? Here, when I set align items to center, these align items represent me the vertical alignment of the items. Why? Because the main axis is the horizontal one, and the align items refers to the cross axis, that in this case is the vertical one. If I set this to flex end, then it will align the items to the bottom. And if I change the direction, then this one will refer to the vertical alignment. This one will refer to the vertical alignment, and this one to the horizontal alignment. Okay? Is it clear, the difference between them? Nice. Now let's suppose that instead of 3 elements, I have like 8 elements, no? So why is this wrap useful? Because without the wrap, then it will try to fix all of the elements as much as possible. But if I set that I'm available to set the elements more on the right to us below, then it automatically wraps them. Okay. What if I do something like this? Is what I was saying before with the grouping, no? So that the last element, and this is why it's super important to format the code, because if I leave the code, for instance, in this way, it's difficult to get what is happening. But if I format this, I can see that the last element is this one. Now, the last element within the flexbox is this one, this last container, and it basically treats it as a new flex item. Okay. A flex item containing more divs within him. And the other. What if I want the first one to be twice as big as the other ones? What should I do? In this case, I will point at it using the ID, so I start with the hashtag. flex 2, okay? So that from all the available space, it will occupy half of the available space. Is everything clear up to now? Do we know how this behaves? Perfect. Let's try to do something a little bit crazy, hoping that it doesn't crash. Okay, yeah, somehow it crashed. But it was just to show you that, for instance, I could make here that an item within the grid layout behaves as a flexbox, no? So that I can play with the nested elements so that the bigger one becomes a grid, but the smaller ones or the elements within that grid layout can behave as flex elements. Okay. Do you have any questions? Nice. Okay, and now we have this responsive design part. So yesterday we already mentioned it. We all know what the responsive design stands for, no? So it is try to design our website or our web application in such a way that even if it is open from different devices, everything displays or everything is understandable to the users and that the users can easily interact with our design, no? So this responsiveness basically expects us to create a way that to automatically change the layout based on the available space and on the opening on the device that we are using to access the web application. Of course, the idea is to improve the usability and the accessibility across all the devices. As you can see here in the example, but also in practice, you have experienced this, that with a mobile device, what usually happens is that all of the contents are arranged vertically, one below the other one, no? Because there is not too much space to set them horizontally. So we try to place them vertically. In some cases, when we have a mobile device, we also choose to hide some contents, no? Not to show everything, but just to hide some contents that might be visible by opening a menu, or that we definitely hide them because we don't want them to be visible in the mobile device. But the same happens with the tablet, and with the desktop we have more freedom. Somehow we have more freedom because we have more space, or we can assume the user has more space and can have a big preview of the contents that we are setting there. Okay. Do you still remember what was the CSS property to hide the elements? Display none, yeah, and visibility hidden, yeah. So for instance, we could think of something like that. If the display that we detect there is a small display or a small device, then we hide an element, or we set the visibility to hidden, okay? And CSS is super powerful because by using CSS we can do something like that, no? We can automatically detect what is the width of the window, and based on the width of the window apply a specific set of CSS rules. So how would you try to read that? How would you understand that snippet of code? The first one seems to be like a condition, no? And if that condition is satisfied, then the CSS rules that apply are these ones, no? So it's a declaration. So if this condition happens, then these rules will be applied. So here it's more clear. So for instance, apply the style if the user has a device that has a minimum height of 680 pixels, or is a screen device in portrait mode. Okay. So if the device has more than 680 pixels, or if the user is using the device in a portrait mode, then apply these rules. Well, let's see this one in practice. That is also more. Question, where do I place this? On the HTML or in the CSS? In the CSS. Okay. I will apply to this one because it's more simple. It doesn't have so much elements and stuff like the previous one, and let's see what happens. Okay. Let's first take a look at what happens, and then we can make sense of how the rule works, no? But when I shrink this width, then the background color of the body becomes red. Yeah. Then if the width goes above what value? 400 pixels. Then this rule doesn't apply anymore. Okay? What happens if I don't set this to max width but min width? It is above the value that I'm specifying, above the value of 400 pixels, apply these rules here. When I set this to max width, it is below that specific value, apply the rules, okay? So by doing this, well, I have the chance to specify diverse. In this case, I'm doing the one for the mobile, no? But if I would also, okay, let's say, what is happening here is I'm saying, okay, if it is below 400, okay, because in this case they are overlapping these two ones. Okay, so here in this case, for instance, with this one, I'm saying if the width is between 400 and 700, then I want to apply this set of CSS rules. That would be the ones that would apply for instance, for a tablet, no? That it's typically from 400 to 700. And then I still have to create another one that would be for the desktop. That would be from, I don't know, I'm just inventing here, but from 1,000 pixels, from at least 1,000 pixels, and from there on, then apply a different set of rules, okay? And if I come to a small device, then it will behave in this way. Of course, what I did here was pretty simple because it's just changing the background color, but the purpose was to make it completely visible what I'm changing. But we can think of something more interesting than this, so that, for instance, Why did I do here? That if we are in a small screen, less than 400 pixels, what do I want to do? To hide a container, to hide the container that has this class. So that could be more interesting than this. Or for instance, instead of hiding this, okay, so for instance, if I am on the tablet, then the text size for this, the font size for this text is 2 rem. That is the one that I defined out of the media queries. That is this one, 2 rem. But if instead of that I come to a small screen, then the text size, the font size of this one becomes 1 rem. Okay.
So when we build a website, we have to rewrite many times, most likely every part of the file.
If we do that from scratch, yes. If we want to create our CSS from scratch, from zero, we have to do that way. Okay. That it would be if we want our site to be responsive, no? So if we want our website that according to the device screen behaves differently, or shows some elements, or show them bigger, or shows a menu or something like that, depending, yeah, we should be doing this with these media queries, so that for each screen size we would think what would change. Because another thing that I wanted to say before is, if for instance this one, let's suppose that this one was white. No? So for instance here, outside of the media queries, I declare that I want this text to be white. So it remains the same, no? So here I set like the common properties, and here within the media queries I just customize what I want to change. I don't rewrite all of the properties, but just the ones that I want to change when the media query when the condition is met. Okay, so that's how it works. Then, now that you made me this question, why it's important to know how this works? Because Bootstrap Because Bootstrap, by default, has already implemented all of the responsive feature, no? All of the responsive facilities. But it exactly behaves the same way we have seen the media queries work. It is just that someone has already defined all of them. And in this case, it's super powerful because in Bootstrap, We'll see that later, but here in Bootstrap it works that if on the class name you set, for instance, this property with a class name to a set of available classes within Bootstrap, it automatically understands that you want that class to be applied when the screen is small, no? So that we directly apply this by applying the classes. It automatically deals with all of the responsiveness deals with the responsiveness. And indeed, here in this column, you can see the values that we were playing with before. I said, for instance, 400, that in this case, they play with 576. But then they set a value for the medium one, for the large one. But below, it is working the way we're seeing here. So it's important to know how it works below, so that when we use Bootstrap that has automatically implemented some things, or that there are some things that are hidden to us, we know how they are working below. Okay, questions? Is it clear how the responsiveness work? Is it clear how the media queries are defined and how the specific rules must be customized to make it work? Perfect. So I think we can take a 15 minutes break and then we continue, okay?